Yes, welcome to the Best on Ground Weekday Kickoff, a brand new show designed to bring you up to speed with the biggest stories in Australian sport every morning. I'll be joined by a rotating crew of Australia's top journos to bring the news to you Monday to Friday. Today we're kicking off with Christy Doran. Christy, great to have you on the show.
Hey, splendid to join. Cheers.
Christy, let's rip straight into it. We're going to go 5 stories. You've got 60 seconds on 4 of them. I'll hold up the golden strainer when it's time to wind it up, and then we'll do a big one to finish off. We'll do double the time. But first, the Gold Coast Suns, 2-0. Well, since the season resumed anyway. Big win against the Adelaide Crows at Metricon Stadium last night. But as Reece Hopfrey reports in the Advertiser this morning, there's been a bit of friction there between Hugh Greenwood from the Suns and Adelaide Crows board director Mark Ricciuto. Talk us through it.
This is a classic case of Mark Ricciuto, one of the greats of the Adelaide Crows, having played his part in letting go one of his talented players, 28-year-old, who goes up to the Gold Coast Suns, and then he plays an absolute blinder in the Gold Coast Suns' victory over the Adelaide Crows over the weekend, and jumps onto Twitter saying probably shouldn't have let me go there, Mark.
Let's go back there 1 second, because Ricciuto had some comments to say last week about why the Crows let people like Greenwood, Jake Lever, Mitch McGovern go. So he was responding directly to that criticism.
Yeah, and that's fair because he was let go. He wanted to have a longer contract from the understanding, and that's what's reported in the Adelaide Advertiser too. But I think this is a case of Mark Ricciuto jumps onto radio and said, this is why we've let guys go, not part of the long-term future. We don't believe that player could have helped us win a premiership. But at the end of the day, the Gold Coast Suns, they've won 2 games straight, and they've had a number of failed seasons. And this player here, he's had a good run against his former side, a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, and you appreciate that. But I think at the end of the day, let's just leave the action on the park and try to build winning momentum.
Check that one out on the Adelaide Advertiser. Ricciuto firing back as well. Let's turn to the 13-man code in the rugby league. Well, we saw Stephen Kearney become the first coaching casualty of the season over the weekend. Firstly, on that somewhat harsh sacking, 41% win record with the Warriors. Do you think that was a bit tough on Kearney?
Oh, if you add into the fact that the Warriors have done the NRL a massive service by coming over to Australia to be in a bubble, so to speak, and not play one home game for a very, very long time, extremely difficult under the circumstances. Can you imagine all your players wanting to spend, months away from their family and their friends, their home environment to be in Australia? Extremely tough to be given the flick just a month after it's restarted. Absolutely, it is.
Brent Reid in The Australian says that Wayne Bennett could be the man to leave the Rabbitohs early and head over to Auckland. Other names linked with the job include Anthony Griffin, Jeff Tuvey, Trent Barrett. What do you think is the right direction?
Every man and their dog wants to have an NRL coaching job, don't they? But look, Wayne Bennett, he's now 70. You've got to start to question, I think, a few different strategic directions. When's the last time that Wayne Bennett actually won a premiership? And we're going back a few years now to the Dragons, and that was nigh on a decade ago. I think, look, someone younger might be actually the best way forward.
Christy Doran versus Wayne Bennett, the big feud. You saw it here first, staying in the NRL now, and another feud at the Parramatta Eels, who we know are having a fantastic season, but there's a bit of acrimony potentially there between Mitchell Moses, their star halfback, and former player, now club employee, Tim Mannah. Michael Chammas reporting in the Sydney Morning Herald today that that's all linked to the Tim Mannah, Isaac Moses spat. Can you background us on this?
Well, this is an awkward situation because it's not just bringing on the past, it's now going into the future. And you see this in so many codes, lingering skeletons in the closet. This has the potential to hear Mitchell Moses, the star halfback at the moment, guiding the Parramatta Eels around, being embroiled in a bit of a spat with the former captain there, who is unceremoniously let go. What was offered the opportunity to be let go last year, and in the end stayed there, played out the remainder of his career in reserve grade. And this came down to potentially a spat with the player agents that represented both of them, Isaac Moses. So an awkward situation here, and it brings to light where do player agents sit with the players, and how much power do they have within clubs, and how awkward can get when you're representing players and coaches across different clubs too.
Yeah, Isaac Moses, of course, deregistered last week for allegedly directing Tim Mannah to lie to the NRL Commission. I think there's plenty to come in this space. We'll stay in the Sydney Morning Herald. Vince Rigari with a great long read on Football Federation Australia, the A-League, and their potential impending split to move to a winter fixture. Of course, signing a new one-year extension with Fox Sports late on Friday afternoon that sees their future secured for another 12 months at least. Reduced terms like we've seen in all the other sports, but now the shift to kick off in December and run through till July. Do you think that that's a smart move from the A-League to move to that competitive football window?
From an optics perspective, absolutely I do. Because do I find it strange that you're playing soccer, football in the middle of summer in Australia when it can get very hot? Yes, I do. I think there's so many distractions now in December as it is. And January, we know that it's the festive season of cricket too. I think this is a great opportunity to not only when you're playing soccer or football as a young kid, boys and girls, adults too, to actually go, hey, there's a product that's being played at a professional level and we're playing it early on the morning of the Saturday too. How good is that? I think it's a great move and it's probably long overdue. And the second thing I'd like to say about that story is the Women's World Cup bid later this week to go ahead and fingers crossed Australia can get it, because that would be a huge boost, not just for women's football, but women's sport in Australia. We've seen Australian bodies go after the Rugby World Cup for women and Rugby Australia failed just the other year. But football is the global game, and this would be a heck of an opportunity to empower women and women's sport.
Yeah, we'll find that out Friday morning, whether the Australian-New Zealand bid has been successful up against Colombia and Japan. And interesting to note that last week, the Matildas, the Australian cricket team, the Diamonds, and the Australian women's rugby sevens team came out in a poll as the 4 most popular national teams in the country. So we'll watch this space and we'll hold our breath on that one. We're pretty excited. Finally, our big mummer, our big whopper, we're going to go double the time on this one. Your colleague Wayne Smith in the Australian, or I should say your rugby colleague, has sat down for the first exclusive one-on-one with Dave Rennie, the incoming Wallabies coach. They've talked all sorts of things. Let's start with the Giteau Law. What did Rennie have to say?
Well, the Giteau Law came into effect 5 years ago in 2015, and basically the former Wallabies coach Michael Checker did so to allow a couple of players that were playing overseas to come back to try to help the Wallabies at the World Cup. Only a couple of players qualified for that, and it was named after Matt Giteau, who came back after a 4 or 5 year stay away from the Wallabies. But this has the potential, if you open up the borders in a Socceroos style where you can pick from all around the world, of all your players in domestic competition packing up and leaving. That is the fear, the great fear, and it's something that has scared Rugby Australia for quite a few years, that if they do open it, they'll leave, particularly when Super Rugby might not be an attractive prospect for some players. Financially, you can earn more money overseas.
I'll jump in there quickly, Christy. South Africa obviously won the Rugby World Cup. They've had a pretty precarious financial situation domestically and therefore allowed that selection criteria to be players anywhere in the world. Rugby Australia, not exactly flush with cash. Is it the model to follow?
I don't think it is. I think you want to encourage your players. Rugby needs a presence in Australia. I think you need some, not only do you need the competition, and that's the big thing at the moment, working out the competition from 2021 onwards. And if you can get that right, I think you'll not only have players that are prepared to stay in Australia, but it's also can become the best competition in the world and get back to what it was 10 years ago. But I think you want players that are killing to play for that Wallabies jersey. And I don't necessarily know if we've had that in the last few years where the dollar signs start to influence whether or not you want to play for your country, because you can still earn very good money playing in Australian rugby. And there's no doubt that, yes, you can get money overseas, but you can earn that money here. And if we get the competition right, the structure, that'll be great for Australian rugby going forward.
Interesting aside to that, of course, Scott Johnson mentioning during the week that maybe he'd be open to Australian eligible players representing New Zealand teams in Super Rugby, still playing within the same competition, which could be an interesting space to watch as well. Could that work the other way? Could we see Bowden Barrett suiting up for the New South Wales Waratahs, for example? Would that bring some excitement to that competition? Christy, we've fired through 5 quick topics. Fantastic to hear your thoughts on those. Can you leave me with something to watch today in the world of sport?
Look, I think you need to look for who's going to be the next coach to fall on their sword in the NRL. That's the big one when you've got 4 or 5 names that are constantly under the gun, and I think Anthony Seibold at the Broncos is one of them.
Anthony Seibold at the Broncos, of course, Dean Pay, Paul McGregor, Paul Green, plenty of guys under pressure in the NRL. John Morris from the Sharks maybe gets a stay of execution after that win.
And will Eddie Jones return?
Will Eddie Jones return? Christy, fantastic to catch up. You'll see us again tomorrow, same time, same place. I'll have a different person joining me tomorrow. You'll have to tune in to find out who that is. If you like the show, make sure you share it on the social channels. Tell your mates. We're going to be here every morning, saving you a bit of time by doing a deep dive into the nation's newspapers, telling you everything you need to know. Christy, have a fantastic day, mate.
You too. Cheers.